we would stay late and work hard, but man, we would drink the whole time we were doing it. Stay late after 5 o'clock and route vinyl or do whatever else we need to do, build gates and stuff like that, drinking the whole time. And that's just not something you ought to be doing. We lost about $250,000 doing that one job. So it was a $500,000 job that we should have bid for about $800,000. And instead we bid it for 4 or something. It's almost 5. Neither one of us wanted to give up a business that was worth nothing. We both thought we had a business that was worth fighting over. And if any one of us is smart, we would have just said, here, you have it.
I'm Mark Olson. Luke Gibson and I have a combined 50 years in construction as fence contractors. In that time, we have both experienced failures and success. We travel the country talking with other contractors who share their experiences in hopes that their stories can make you a more successful contractor.
You want to clap? You want the honors?
Yeah, if I may. All right.
Okay, now we have a clap. So we left off, and I don't know, for all of you people might be wondering who this guy is. This is not the other guy. This is not the typical other guy.
Not the other guy.
This is Nick. Nick's job with SWI is to make videos. That's what Nick does. He's a video guy. So he is the one responsible for the hours and hours and hours of editing on all these videos. Some of you guys have met him if you've been out to the Fall Fence Forum. So this is Nick, and he is an integral part of the SWI team. So when we finished up the lander project is when we learned about the 10% retainage, and that was kind of our introduction to that and learning how to cash manage all those things. So that was 2003. And in 2004 and 5 and 6 and even 7, we all know that those were huge explosive years. We were really big into the residential fencing, and then we continued to grow our commercial side. And I remember going to field training school in Athens, Georgia, and meeting up with Mike Robinson from Robinson Fence, who some of you people may know him. And he ended up being my roommate when I was down there learning more about how to build fence. And this is, I think, spring of 2003, early spring. So before we did the lander job. At any rate, I remember telling him that we were planning on doing $1 million in our third year. And him saying, oh, geez, we've been in business for a long time, and, you know, there's no way. He said, there's just no way. I mean, it takes a long time to build up to that. Sure enough, we did it, but we definitely experienced our growing pains in achieving that goal. But I was just in that growth mindset, and I was always about growing and growing and growing. And so when I tell a lot of this story, I accept a lot of the responsibility, because it was because of that growth mindset that we got into a lot of the stumbling blocks that we did. So we ended up having to start hiring people, and as the business grew, we started out with 2 part-time people, and then finally went to some full-time people in the summer. And after 2003, Carl ended up coming on full-time, and so in 2004 we were rocking and rolling. That was going to be our first $1 million year.
And who's Carl?
Carl's my older brother. So Carl and I, who is the electrician, owned Olson Fencing. Now, it's Alan and I, my younger brother and I, that own SWI. And we'll kind of get to how all that happened. 2004, we got into vinyl fence, and we just had, there just wasn't a lot of competition, and we were just able to skyrocket. I mean, had no problems meeting $1 million in that third year. Started hiring people, and that's when we started running into the problems with all the, employee problems that everybody always talks about. Our philosophy back then is that, much like a lot of people is that they're there to serve us, and you'll do what I say as long as I'm paying you and you're on the clock. You're there to basically be my slave. And that caused a whole bunch of problems. We just didn't have the right mindset as far as team members and all that stuff go. And that created problems. I mean, not to say that we were ruling with an iron fist. We just were not the company that we are today. I had a serious drinking problem back then, which came on probably early 2000s, when I was pretty unhappy being that manager in North Platte, Nebraska of the CarQuest. And I was mid-20s. I mean, that's just what you do. You go out and you drink, and it's socially acceptable. And so I drank plenty, drank a ton, did tons of irresponsible things, and that kind of came into our company. And that would probably be, I don't know what number we're on. Go ahead and throw that number in there. But whatever number we're on, that's the next one. We were doing things, we were not treating our business like a business. We would stay late and work hard, but man, we would drink the whole time we were doing it. So we wouldn't drink at work, but we'd stay late after 5 o'clock and route vinyl or do whatever else we need to do, build gates and stuff like that, drinking the whole time. And that's just not something you ought to be doing. I mean, that's just, you're fostering a culture that is going to lead to nothing but problems when you do that. And so, not surprising, we attracted the kind of people that love to drink, and that had its own problems that come with it. And people started getting DUIs and things like that. Luckily, despite all the drinking that I did, I was very fortunate that I never got caught for the stuff I did. It's not to say that I didn't do those things. So we fostered that kind of culture where you just drink and you party and you work hard, but you play hard and all that stuff. And we still do that today, but it means something completely different. So that was another mistake we made, not treating our business like a business, and you can't do those things. And in all that, because there was so much drinking going on and stuff like that, it led me to kind of down a dark road, and it led to a lot of frustrations between Carl and I. So we had ended up having a lot of animosity towards each other, and it's partnerships are very tough. Dave Ramsey is famous of saying, yeah, the only ship that won't float is a partnership, or something. He has something like that. But anyhow, so partnerships are tough. And inevitably, in a lot of partnerships, both people end up feeling like they're the ones doing the most and contributing the most, and that leads to a lot of animosity and heartache. And so kind of bumped along for 2004 and 2005, and I remember, I think it was like 2004 is when I went to Orlando, and the accountant called me and said, "Man, you had a great year." And I was like, this feels horrible. And then in 2007, Carl and I had a great big blow up, just kind of family squabble, and something that there again is not unique to us, not unique to any family business. It's more of the rule, not the exception. So we had this great big blow up, and part of our problem was that we were fighting over a company that really wasn't worth anything. We had accumulated a lot of debt by that point in time, had gotten into a bank, and they got us into SBA loans, and we'll come back to that here in a second, but accumulated a lot of debt and just really didn't know what we were doing. And the accountant was calling us stupid because we didn't know how to read our financial reports. And so at the end of 2007, lo and behold, about December, somebody comes knocking on our door and says, "Hey, we'd like to take a look at your business and see how you're, understand you might be struggling and see how we can help you." And so we let them in. They looked at things, and oh my gosh, you guys are a train wreck. And some of that was show, but ended up hiring them to come and talk to us and teach us a bunch of stuff. And that cost us about $110,000 over the next month and a half. And we really didn't have it because 2007 was a horrible year. Carl and I were fighting. We actually ended up sitting down with an attorney over the whole thing, and neither one of us wanted to give up a business that was worth nothing. We both thought we had a business that was worth fighting over, and if any one of us was smart, we would have just said, "Here, you have it," because it wasn't worth anything at that point in time. And so we hired this consultant to come in, and they taught us a tremendous amount about how to read financial reports and how to know our costs, know what our break-even point was, know what we need to be charging for every labor hour that we worked on a project, and just every single aspect of how to run a company. It was basically that college education we never got, so we paid $110,000 for our introductory business course. And that was kind of a defining moment. Now, before that, we had gotten into a bank, and they were always, we'd bring them in our papers, and we'd say, "Okay, tell us if it looks good." We didn't have any idea what they were looking for. It was just, how much can you give us? And we got a line of credit, and we quickly ran up our line of credit and never paid it off. And that frustrates banks pretty bad when you do that. They like to term because at that point in time, it looks like a cash injection. So we did that. We got a line of credit, ran it up, never paid it down, because we just kept buying inventory and buying equipment or whatever else we needed at the time, and really got ourselves into a bad relationship with the bank. So that was kind of a stressful relationship. They didn't understand how little we didn't know about business, and they were expecting us to do things that we didn't know we were supposed to do. When they gave us a line of credit in the beginning, I remember not even realizing that we need to revolve that and pay that down. how we need to treat that. So that was another mistake we did, is getting a line of credit, not knowing how to properly use it, and not knowing what the bank was expecting of us as a part of that responsibility of having that debt. So 2008 rolls around. We all kind of know what happened in 2008, but we were kind of behind the market in Wyoming, and so 2008 was the best year we ever had. We went from doing, in 2007, I want to say we were just right around $2 million, and realized that we needed to get up to $3 million to grow our way out of our problem, because in 2007 we had lost some money and not had a great year. And one of the things you constantly hear is you can't shrink your way to prosperity, and so that was what the consultant told us, is you guys have got to grow, and here's the numbers, and you need to hit those numbers. And we did that. We hit those numbers and then some, because we finally were off and running. And that was one of those times when we learned the value of making sure, well, I would say we kind of learned part of the lesson there, and that is that you need to sell things for what your costs are. You can't use somebody else's cost. You can't arbitrarily set a rate. You need to know your numbers. So that's another huge mistake. We never knew our numbers until late 2007, early 2008. So then we finally learned our numbers. We're off to the races, raised our prices tremendously, and we thought, well, geez, we'll never sell any fence if we raise our prices. And boy, were we wrong. Best year we ever had. But right on the heels of 2008 came 2009. And so at the end of 2008, we had a great year, but we were all nervous because that spring was coming, it was winter, and we're like, we finally got kind of the wheels on the bus turning in the right direction, but then 2009 comes along and we're all worried about getting work. So we went out and bid a whole bunch of work for YDOT and got some really big projects. We got one that was like almost $500,000 doing 20 miles of barbed wire fence. And we're overly aggressive in trying to get that work, so much so that when we went out and did that job in 2009, we lost about $250,000 doing that one job. So it was a $500,000 job that we should have bid for about $800,000, and instead we bid it for $4 or something, almost $5. Lost a tremendous amount of money, and it's because we panicked. And that was a huge lesson we learned there. So we learned not to panic. And in 2010, we decided, okay, well, that didn't work out so well. We got really aggressive and we panicked, and we went out and just bid any work, even though it wasn't the right work, and did work for YDOT, and that job didn't go so smoothly. I mean, we had all kinds of labor problems on the job. We fought with YDOT. And we had fought with YDOT before, and that is a lesson that's going to come up here. But we just got overly aggressive and panicked, and you can't panic in business because that's not going to lead you anywhere you want. So in 2010, we went from doing like 3.1 million back down to 1.9 or something like that. And because we need to be doing that $3 million profitably to be able to make money, we lost money, but not as much as we did in 2009 when we did the $3 million and lost money the whole time. So 2008 we did 3 million, 2009 we did about 3 million, 2010 we did about 1.9, 2 million, somewhere in there. And then 2011, I don't remember a whole lot about that, but we were just trying to keep it together. And in the process, we took on some landscaping, we took on playgrounds, because we were trying to get back to that number we needed, where we lost all that revenue in 2010. We're trying to find profitable ways to boost our income back up. So we took on some things, and that was another lesson we learned. Whatever lesson we're up to now is stay in your lane. I can't overemphasize the fact that you need to stick to what you're good at. By diluting yourself, and you always hear the term diversification, you need to diversify, and that might be well and good, but if you don't have the capital and stuff to diversify, and you don't have the manpower and things like that to really set up a whole separate division, it's not good to diversify. Stick to what you know. If you're a really good ag fencer, stick to ag fencing. If you're really good at residential, stick to residential. You get into trouble when you try and diversify outside of what your core competency is. And that's what we did. We diversified outside of our core competency. We were not good at ag fencing, and we did that 20-mile job that lost us money. And then we got into playgrounds and landscape, and that, just diluted our efficiency and efficacy on the fencing stuff. Because now we're trying to use fencing guys to do things that they're not used to doing, and not only are they not used to doing it, they don't necessarily like doing that. So in 2011, we kind of muddled our way through that, and that was kind of late 2010. We got into that as well. And 2012 rolls around, and we had lost money in 2009, 2010, 2011, and 2012. We're starting to really get into panic mode again. So we went out, and in the spring we bid this great big job, and it was a big vertical snow fence job. So if you've ever been down I-80 in Wyoming, they have 12-foot tall vertical snow fence between Rollins and Laramie. And so we bid this great big job, and we bid it to do labor only. And didn't really know what we were getting into. All we could see was dollar signs, and I just don't see how we can lose money on this, and we got to buy a piece of equipment. We'll do whatever it takes and we'll get it done. Well, we ended up buying specialty equipment specifically for that job, which is something you shouldn't do. You shouldn't buy something for one project specifically, especially if you can't, don't bid a job and think, well, this job is going to pay for this piece of equipment. So that's another mistake we made. Went down there and just fought it the whole time. And we fought it for probably a month and a half, and we're starting to run up against deadlines and starting to get frustrated because we were not using the right equipment. And finally got it figured out and started flying. But by that time, we were spending $25,000 a week plus in payroll, which was too much for our little company. And it was just bleeding us dry of cash. There wasn't enough money coming in. And not to mention, we're to the point where we were going to start losing money on this project. And then we couldn't make YDOT happy. And we didn't realize it when we bid the job, but the previous contractor, they were not happy with. And so when we showed up on the job, they were ready to fight whoever it was. And so it didn't matter if it was us or somebody else. They were going to be pretty tough on us no matter who it was. They were just not happy with the prior contractor. And so we kind of walked into a bad situation. And then ended up getting in a lot of squabbles over this project with the on-site guy, and just couldn't make him happy no matter what we did, because they were so used to what the other contractor did. They were just out for blood, and it didn't feel like we could make him happy. And that's where we'll pause for just a second.